Hello and welcome to the 14th video that I'll be posting in my Unity platformer tutorial series, and in today's video we'll be discussing about what I said in the previous video, and that's cherries or collectible items. And to start things off in today's video, I'd like to introduce to all of you about prefabs. And prefabs will be really handy feature in Unity that can help you create multiple objects that you just program once and you can just duplicate it as fast as possible. And the way you can do this is for our cherries. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna right click on the hierarchy, go to our 2D objects and click on sprite because we want to make a sprite, and we're gonna name this sprite cherries. Okay, so cherries because our collectible item will be cherries. And then in our sprite renderer we can go to our Sunnyland, go to our artwork, go to our sprites, go to our items, go to our cherry, and there are multiple lists of cherries. And what I want to do is I'm going to drag the first cherry 1, to our sprite renderer so that it can render. And when I click on our cherry here, it zooms in to the spot that shows no image. And the main reason why is because our additional settings here in our sorting layer is in default. And we want it to be in entity, or you know what, we're just going to make a new sorting layer. And this sorting layer will be right or below entity. Yeah, and it's going to be called items. Yeah, items. And then we go back to our cherries and make sure it's in the items list. And as a matter of fact, as you can see, this is our normal person and this is our cherry, and it's so small. And that's because, as always, Unity makes sure that the pixels per unit is 100, while we want it to be 16. So I'm just gonna select all of this, cherry 1 to cherry 7, by clicking shift and then click on cherry 7 and changing the pixels per unit to 16. Apply. And now, as you can see, it's normal size. And I guess we can make it much smaller from our player, as the size difference is actually not that big. But I guess it's, for the meantime, it's okay to be this big. Or you can resize it simply by going to our scale tool here and just zoom in or zoom out. I just want it to be this big. Yeah, that made sense. And then what I want you to do right now is create an animation for the cherries. Okay? So in the previous video I did discuss about making animations, and this time I want you guys, the audience, to make an animation for our cherries. Okay, so pause the video right now and do the animation challenge. Okay, for those of you who did manage to make the animation for the cherries, good job. And for those of you who don't know how to make the animation for cherries, no problem. And the way you can make the animation is go to our windows here and go to our animation, or click Control 6, and then you click on our cherries here so that it knows which item we want to actually animate. And then I'm gonna create a new folder again, new folder for cherry animation, because I like to keep my things organized in my assets. Now when I click create, I can select my cherry animation here and just name this animation cherry animation. Okay, and then I go back to the Sunnyland asset, go to artwork, go to sprites, go to the items, cherry, drag all of this by clicking shift. So cherry 1, shift, cherry 7, dragging all of this to the animation window, and then just simply moving them one by one. As always, I'm gonna move this to 5 frames per second. Every 5 frames there will be a picture. And now when we click play, you can see that Cherry is actually animating. Okay. And now a feature that I like to introduce to Cherries also is the box collider, because as a matter of fact, if we don't have any box collider, and if we click play right now, the cherry just disappears. And the reason why the cherry disappears just now, as you can see, if I click on play right now, cherry disappears. And the main reason why this happens is because the main camera is -10, and our cherry's position in the Z position here, Z, is -14. And the camera cannot see something that is way far ahead, and it can only see something like behind it. So if I go -9 here, game, we can see that there's a cherry spawning. And that's a thing that you gotta be aware of, because it's pretty annoying when it disappears. When it goes to -9, and in our main camera it's -10. So anything above -9, like let's just say -11 here, it's gone. -10, gone. -9, 8. Actually, Z that's 0 can also be a form, or will also be shown, as long as the Z position does not exceed the Z position of the main camera, which is -10. So if the Z value of an item is higher than -10, like -11, then it won't show in the camera, because if we think of depth, we can see that -10 is like, for example, here in this line here, and -11 is somewhere like behind it. So whatever happens, just change the Z value, as Z value is actually what usually is the main problem of disappearing and appearing objects. And that only happens in the 2D world, while in the 3D world, we have full control over the Z, and that is why you gotta always make sure the Z value is always less than the main camera when we are doing programming or making games in the 2D world. In the 3D world, it's really simple because you can see the depth. So there should be no problem when it comes to the 3D world. And a feature that I would like to show is the box collider, because if I don't add any colliders for our cherry, then as you can see now, I just walk towards the cherry and nothing happens. Nothing happens. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna add a box collider. Box collider 2D. Remember, choose the 2D version of box collider, because this box collider here on the top shows or represents Unity's 3D game making, and the 2D is used for only 2D. So click on the 2D. And a feature that I'd like to show to you guys is not resizing, but we do need to resize this. Is the that that's good enough. Is the box slider feature where it says is trigger here, and is trigger here is actually used for programming, and I'll show you why. So what I want to do is I'm gonna tick is trigger, and we go to our scripts and open up our player controller script. Okay, and a pre-made function actually made by Unity is called a on trigger enter 2D. So if we just type in private, okay, and a void on trigger enter 2D here, my Visual Studio tells me that on trigger enter 2D is called when the collider 2D other enters the trigger. And if we click enter here, it already creates our program by itself, or our paragraphs and our brackets here. And this is actually a pre-made function made by Unity for us to use. And on trigger enter here, like I said before, that I tell you, is actually a code used for when a Collider 2D enters a trigger. And a trigger just now in our cherries. I click on our box slider and I chose is trigger. So this code can actually work for is trigger. And the way we can do this is we need to tell the computer that we are talking specifically to the cherry for our collider, right? And the main problem is that the computer does not know which objects is triggered that we want to program. And we need to make like an if statement. If we are touching cherries, we are touching cherries when player is touching cherries. Okay, if player is touching cherries, then we want our program to tell us that we want to destroy that object and we get a value. Okay, and our main problem here is we don't know how we call the cherries. We cannot just say game object equals to cherries because we're gonna have multiple cherries. So we gotta change to cherries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we can't use that program. And the simplest way to do this is actually using tags here. Tag here is also used for programming. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna add tag and we're gonna click plus here and we're gonna say cherries. Okay? We're gonna go to our cherries and we're gonna select the cherries tag. And then now, if we go to our if statement here, we can just type in using our tag code, and that is if collision, since we're gonna collide with an object, okay? If collision, and when I say collision here, we are comparing to this collision, and this collision is usually used for the other object, okay? And if collision, and then we want to compare the tag, we can just simply type in tag here like this. Tag, and it's gonna say compare tag, and then is this game object tagged with tag? So it's trying to say, is this the right object that has the tag? And it's gonna ask us for the string tag, and we can type in cherries here. So cherries, in a close bracket, and then now let's just say we want a value to increase, right? So let's just make a private or a public variable right now in the top here called cherry num. Let's just make a public variable so we can see in the inspector public int cherry num like this, and then let's just make it cherry num, and then we're just gonna add semicolon. Then we go back down and then we go to if collision dot compare tag, and then we get cherries, then we get cherry num plus equals to 1. So that means we are adding its previous number plus 1, and then it becomes cherry num again. And then we want to destroy that cherries, right? So let's just say destroy, and then we want the game object, so collision game object, and then semicolon. And the reason why I'm using collision here is actually referring to the object. So let's just imagine that if on trigger enter collider 2D, which means we collide with this collision object, then we want to make sure that the collision object is using the tag cherries. Then if we are actually colliding with a collision object with the tag cherries, then we want to destroy that game object plus cherry num. Okay, and then we add the cherry num. Now if we click play right here, then we get our player here. Then we go to our, where is it? Cherry num equals 0. When we move it to the side a little bit, and we move our player next to the cherry, and then it's gonna destroy the cherry, remember? It's gonna destroy the cherry, and as you can see in our script, cherry num equals 1, and the cherry is gone now. And that's essentially all the programming we're gonna need for the cherries. And now it's a matter of making a prefab. So I'm gonna create a new folder called cherry prefab. Okay, and then inside of the cherry prefab, I'm going to drag the cherries, and this is how you actually make a prefab. You drag the item that you want, you drag it to a folder, and then it's gonna make a prefab where Cherries here is essentially like a prefab where there's going to be a preset object here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to make this cherry or cherry group. Cherry. Okay, and then I want to drag the cherries inside of cherry. And the reason why I'm actually doing this is not because of programming side or anything, but then I just actually want to make it much more organized. So I'm gonna say that this cherries what's it called, cherries group. Okay, and inside of cherries group I'm going to have a lot of cherries. So this right here, this cherry right here, is already a prefab. And a prefab is essentially an object or an item that you can duplicate over and over by simply dragging it. And this item here, this cherry here, already has all the programming of this cherry. It's original cherry. So it has cherry render, it has the items already, it already has the box collider, is trigger. And if you make a prefab of a sprite that has a script, then when you actually duplicate it like this cherry right here, it's a duplicate, then it already also has the script connected to it. So it's really nice when we are just programming one sprite and then we want to duplicate it over and over. So that's how you make a prefab and use the prefab for our needs. And then you can simply just drag it to our cherries group. And then, yeah, you can just simply drag to it. And then we can get multiple cherries here, actually. We have multiple cherries, like so. And when we click play right now, we can see if we go to our player here. This is the reason why I actually wanted to make a cherries group, and that's because if we connected all the cherries, wait, give me a second. Let me just put on all the cherries. If we put on all the cherries in our cherries group here, and when I have a lot of hierarchy or when I want to change or look to other stuff, I can simply just click on the arrow here and it'll retract itself and become one single line instead of like 4 lines. So I'm just actually just classifying my objects into game objects that actually help classify my objects. And I just like to keep things organized. So yeah, I can close Cherry's group here. And if I go to my player and then I go to my cherry num, which is 0, and if I move left, I can get 1, 2, and 3. And as you can see, the cherry here is gone now. There are no more cherry objects, and in our player, I actually get cherry num to 3, which means that I have 3 cherries stored. And this can be used for our UI later on as the series progresses. So now it's time to review all the code. So what I did for our programming today is actually add a new variable called cherrynum. And cherrynum is essentially what I'm going to be used for our UI, but for the meantime, it's going to keep track of how many cherries that the player take. And that's actually used for explanation. And here I actually create a new method, and it uses Unity's onTriggerEnter2D method. And that method is already actually created by Unity, and I don't need to actually type in anything except onTriggerEnter, and it's a pre-made function by Unity. And this function here is actually saying that when our object or the sprite is actually colliding with another object which is triggered on its collider. Okay, so basically it's just a method used when we want to have a sprite colliding with another sprite, and that other sprite is trigger on their collider. Okay, and then we actually use our tags here, and the tag is actually really helpful because it can help us know which items we want to know when we are using isTrigger. So this helps us classify objects and help us program the code instead of actually using layers. Like in last time we used layers, remember? And it's touching layer something like that, or if it's layer mask something like that. And another way we can do it is tags, and tags really awesome when it comes to actually classifying objects or enemies. So if we collide with a player or enemy later, we can actually use our tag enemies to make sure that the program knows that we are colliding with an enemy or a group or sprites that are classified in the enemy tag. And yeah, in this case, we use our tag cherries, and this code right here means to destroy the game object, the collision game object. And the collision here is actually referring to the object that our sprite collides with. Okay, so if you want to say the object, we can just change or use this word collision. And I know this doesn't make sense at first, but then the more you use it, the more you understand about it. And I can't really explain how this is our object, but then as you can see, I'm referring to this tag, this object. So basically, let's just refer this to the thing that we are colliding with. Okay, so this collision, if this object is compare tag cherries, then we want to destroy this object, and then we add our cherry num. So I hope that cleared things up, and I think I've covered up everything in today's video for our cherries and our collectibles. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys understand more about Unity programming, and I think that's it for me today, and I'll see you in the next video.